We're going to switch our focus over to the AFC South today. Let's start off with a team that was pretty surprising last year, the Houston Texans. Their win total is set at 9.5. They're plus 105 to win the AFC South, plus 1,600 to win the Super Bowl, all courtesy of Bally Bet. Last season, the Texans found stability at coaching with D'Amico Ryans and their QB of the future in CJ Stroud. Do you expect the Texans to take another big leap this season?
Yeah, I think this team is kind of a perfect example of how things can quickly change in the NFL. I mean, 2 years ago, they have Lovie Smith as the head coach, fired after a year. Before that, David Culley, who was just kind of a career assistant
Yeah.
head coach, they fire him after a year. Then they find D'Amico Ryans off the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. He was the defensive coordinator for the 49ers, had a lot of good defenses, also played for the Texans. So it was definitely a hire where there was like, we need to figure out this head coaching position. We can't keep firing coaches. We need stability. They hit on D'Amico Ryans, but most importantly, they hit on CJ Stroud, the second overall pick in last spring's draft. And he was outstanding. Going into last season, the Texans had a win total of 6.5. And there was a lot of doubts about Houston and how they would do this season because just question marks about Stroud that came up through the draft and in the offseason. And then the offensive line was absolutely banged up going into the season. But Stroud showed his potential. He overcame all that adversity, took a wide receiver group that on paper didn't really look good and turned them into star players with Tank Dell and Nico Collins, even Dalton Schultz is tight end. And now this year, they know that they have the quarterback. They know that they have the coach. So what they do if a quarterback on a rookie deal, they load up the roster in free agency, which is what you're supposed to do on a rookie deal. And because of that, I don't want to step in front of the Texans because even though they overachieved last year compared to their preseason expectations, I don't want to step in front of a team with a dynamic quarterback making a very little amount of money compared to his production. And then you bring in Stephon Diggs at wide receiver, Joe Mixon at running back. You kind of shore up the defense, headlined by a pass rusher and Daniil Hunter. So it's a team that I'm pretty excited to see. I think that they're definitely a contender. I'm not sure if I'm going to put them as a contender in the AFC or to win the AFC quite yet, but I definitely wouldn't be surprised if they're there. The thing that is holding me back on the Texans and kind of betting them anything positive in the regular season is the schedule will get much tougher year over year compared to what we saw in 2023. And the extra games that they play against other opponents that, teams in the AFC South don't have to play are against the Ravens, Chiefs, and then their NFC crossover game against the Cowboys. So kind of a tough slate there for the Texans, but it is definitely a very good team, a team I don't really want to bet against and step in front of.
Yeah. Team that has the seventh best odds to win the Super Bowl. Just got to stay healthy and see what they can get. All right, Nate, let's move on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Their win total is set at 8.5. They're plus 275 to win the AFC South, plus 5,000 to win the Super Bowl, all on Bally Bet. Last year, the Jaguars started the season 8-3, but they fell apart down the stretch and missed the playoffs. Is Jacksonville going to bounce back this season?
Yeah, I think there's potential for them to bounce back. A big thing that happened last year was Trevor Lawrence had multiple injuries, concussion. There was like a sprained ankle that he was playing through, and I think that kind of held the team back late in the season and kind of led to their downfall in December and then losing in week 18 in a game that they had to win to make the playoffs and win the division at Tennessee. I do want to kind of like this team more because I do think there's a chance of positive regression with a healthy Lawrence and Doug Peterson as a head coach I respect. But I just don't feel the same way. I don't know. It's like a almost like a hunch or just the vibe is off in Jacksonville in terms of maybe them winning a playoff game like they did in 2022, especially in a loaded AFC. At one point this offseason, I was thinking about betting them over 8.5 wins just because they won 9 last year, but started off really well at 8-3. So it could have definitely been 10 or 11, an easy division win. And then our perception of Jacksonville would probably be a lot of different. But I also don't really like that they open at Miami, and I'm not extremely high in Miami, but early on in the season, Miami is a scary team because of how they could score points. And then they also play the Browns in week 2, which is a team I'm higher on than most. So if you want to bet on the Jaguars, I would just look at the individual game week 1 and bet the over at 49 or 49.5 when the Jacksonville Jaguars travel up south to Miami or down to Miami and within the state of Florida to play the Dolphins. I feel like there could be some points in that game where I'm buying the Jacksonville offense, but the defense I'm not really sure about. But you can trust Doug Peterson, I think, to kind of get this team back on track offensively. But as a whole, in a competitive AFC, it's just a team that I think is kind of priced right at a win total of 8.5, where just kind of bang average, especially within this conference.
All right, let's ship it up to Indianapolis to talk about the Colts. Their win total is set at 8.5. They're plus 325 to win the AFC South and plus 6,600 to win the Super Bowl, all courtesy of Bally Bet. The Colts came one game short of making the playoff in Shane Steichen's first season as head coach. Does this team have the potential to be a dark horse in the AFC?
Yeah, so the Colts are a team I feel like there's a wide range of outcomes. I really like their head coach and Shane Steichen. Did incredible in his first year in charge, especially when you consider for most of the quarterback snaps it was taken by Gardner Minshew, who turned out to be a turnover machine and just not a very good quarterback. But he got or Steichen got the most out of Minshew and the offense. You also had Jonathan Taylor miss a good amount of time through holding out and then an injury of his own. The big X factor though for the Colts and why I could see them doing very well, but also kind of having a lower floor would be Anthony Richardson. I know he's a very intriguing player, a player that was kind of hard to judge in college because he played at the University of Florida and there was a lot of weird things going on at Florida, I think behind the scenes that held back Richardson. And he also had some injuries, so he never really got a big chance to have a prominent role in the Florida offense. But his athleticism is incredible. He can throw the ball a mile. And this system with Steichen, who kind of molded the Philadelphia Eagles system that took him to the Super Bowl with Jalen Hurts, kind of fits Richardson well. But I also have questions about Richardson, who's kind of been struggling in training camp, had some up and down performances in preseason games. So his inconsistency, and then also the Colts not really spending a lot of money in free agency. I mean, you have a quarterback on a rookie deal. Do what the Texans did and sign players, and they still have a lot of cap space and didn't address their secondary, which is a very young unit and could be a problem on the back end for the Colts defense. And teams could definitely exploit that, especially when you look at the week one matchup against CJ Stroud and the Texans. So the saving grace, I guess, for the Colts is they do have a favorable schedule where their extra games are against the Steelers, Broncos, and Giants. But it's such a team that is, such a wide range of outcomes, as I mentioned, where I'm going to pass betting on them and just kind of watching the Steichen Richardson maturation process and see if there's a massive improvement. Because I do think this team does have a high ceiling just because Richardson has the athletic tools and traits to be a great quarterback.
For sure. Let's take it over to Tennessee. Let's talk about the Titans. Their win total is set at 6.5, plus 950 to win the AFC South, 150 to 1 odds to win the Super Bowl, all courtesy of Bally Bet. We've seen a lot of changes with the Titans as they let go of Mike Vrabel last season, brought in an offensive-minded coach in Brian Callahan. What are your expectations for the Titans and their new regime this season?
Yeah, it's a tough team for me to gauge because when you fire a guy like Mike Vrabel, who really got the most out of the talent that Tennessee had the last few years. I mean, a few years ago, they were the number one seed in the AFC playoffs. And that was with Ryan Tannehill as quarterback and a defense that was good. But I always thought could be a little better, especially since Vrabel was an offensive mind. But Vrabel just got the most of the team. He was a master motivator, and they thrived, especially in the big underdog role. But the thing is, you would think that Tennessee, kind of a sell team, you get rid of Vrabel, but they did spend a lot of money in this offseason. They spent a ton of money on Calvin Ridley at wide receiver, and I guess it kind of makes sense because you go out, you hire Brian Callahan, who is the offensive coordinator for the Bengals. So he implemented a lot of 3 wide receiver sets for Joe Burrow with T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Tyler Boyd. You actually bring in Tyler Boyd to play the slot, and then you have DeAndre Hopkins, and then the big money splash, getting Ridley on the outside. And the big question here with Tennessee and why I have a tough time gauging them is because of Will Levis, who ended up being a second round pick 2 springs ago in the draft. He was supposed to be a first round pick, a surefire first round pick, and then completely fell. He showed some bright spots last year when he did take over for Ryan Tannehill, and he had a lot of big splash plays. I think his debut, he had 3 or 4 touchdowns. They were all deep bombs, but down to down, it wasn't all great for Will Levis. So kind of want to see Will Levis now with an offensive-minded coach, a guy who helped Joe Burrow a lot in his development, and see if he kind of can take the next step, especially with an offense that did load up, even though they look like maybe a rebuilding team when they kind of let Mike Vrabel out the door in Nashville. But they're trying to win. The win total 6.5. I wouldn't talk anyone out of going over 6.5 if you believe believe in them, especially in a division that isn't the most challenging in the AFC. But it's not for me. I just kind of want to see how this plays out because I'm not totally sold in Will Levis being a big time star quarterback or just even a above average quarterback in the NFL in his second season.
Yeah, Nate, let's hope he, just like he eats his bananas, maybe he can change the way he plays football too. It's a little bit better. Which team do you think is actually going to win this division in the long run?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go with the Houston Texans. I know they're
Yep.
favorites and they're favorites for a reason. I mean, you can make a case for really any of the teams, but I just like the idea of how they loaded up the roster, signing or trading for Stephon Diggs. I know running backs aren't
Yeah.
that important, but getting Joe Mixon, who he's a good piece to have, and Daniil Hunter defensively, and some other pieces to help out D'Amico Ryan's in that unit. And I just expect Stroud to take another big leap. But I also wouldn't be surprised because there's upside with the Colts. There's some upside with the Titans. Like if they won the division, I wouldn't be shocked. And then Jacksonville, I feel like it has some opportunity to positively regress, but I don't totally believe in them. So Houston Texans for
Yep.
me, AFC South winner.